Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hello and welcome to the London part of the show. I'm Alex Forsyth. Well, joining me to look forward to Thursday's local elections in the capital are Karen Buck, the Labour MP for Westminster North, Tom Brake, the Liberal Democrat MP for Carshalton and Wallington, and the man responsible for organising the Conservatives in the capital, Paul Scully, who's also the MP for Sutton and Cheam. Welcome to you all. Now, before we drill down into the policies and the politics at play, our reporter Bhavani Vadi, armed with colour-coordinated political cupcakes and a flask of tea, pitched up at a very breezy Primrose Hill in North London to ask three distinguished Londoners what they felt the main issues are in the run-up to the poll.
There are 4 more days until Londoners vote.
So what are the issues that could sway their decision on May the 3rd? We're asking 3 influential Londoners their views while taking in these views of the capital.
Londoners are telling us for the first time now that their number one concern is housing. And this is rating above other issues they might be thinking about, how their local councillor is taking a position on Brexit or even on the NHS. So housing, particularly for all those millions of people who are renting, has shot up as the top issue.
And basically what you've got in London is a city which is a playground for the rich, a bit of a treadmill for the middle classes trying to keep your head above water, and frankly a workhouse for the poor, because you can't afford the rents, you certainly can't afford to buy, and we're seeing some of that being played out on the streets.
If what people are telling us comes about, they are going to reward councillors who are pro-development. I'm not sure it's going to be along party political lines, but those councillors who say, yeah, I'm up for building in my area, I think young people in particular, renters, will vote for them. And that will be a surprise because councillors are underestimating just how much that issue has risen up the agenda.
And of course these local elections are coming in the middle of the Windrush scandal, aren't they?
Well, I mean, certainly it's not going to translate well for the party in power, I think. I think there's a real sense of being let down. And I'm afraid the Windrush thing, it stinks. And it's gonna make people feel odd. I also think it's a kind of polarising factor, because I think there are some people who might be thinking, good on them, you know, we've always won.
Well, I mean, across the, I mean, we have to be careful, it's true. I mean, I think, you know, that the so-called hostile environment policy, which triggered this particular bad treatment. You know, some people in the electorate might actually think, you know, that's what we want. I also think that it twangs a sort of string that feels unfair.
There have been some dire predictions for the Tories in London. Do you think the Windrush scandal is going to harm their chances even further, Tony?
As Victor said, it's not the greatest thing that helped them, but in rather the same way, and I don't want to draw any sense of equivalence, but the anti-Semitism row is, you know, has given the Labour Party a problem, and I think each party would have to take a look at these issues, just ask the question, not in a sense why did it happen, but what are the underlying values of our party?
Do you think these elections are going to be about bins or Brexit?
Well, if EU citizens turn out, and typically they haven't turned out at quite the levels as other Londoners in this election, then I think that, you know, obviously Brexit is going to be on their minds, and you can anticipate that they're going to be sending a message.
It's generated a sense of, well, how welcome do you feel? And how involved do you want to be in the democratic process? So I do think we may see a drop in the numbers of EU citizens willing to vote. But I think generally people will want to see their services, their health and social care, their bins and housing being addressed.
It ought to be bins. I think there'll be a bit of Brexit here and there, remembering that in some London boroughs there will be 10 or even 15% of the voters who are EU nationals. In fairness, there are other parts of the city, particularly in the east, a number of boroughs there, where people voted quite strongly to leave, and they may decide that they want to send that signal too. And, you know, politics of the old left-right kind, breaking up.
Yeah,
it's breaking up. It's being lots of things. Some of it will be about Brexit, some of it's about identity, what we feel like, why we're and all sorts of other things are now overlaying British politics.
On that note, do you want some tea and cake?
Political cakes.
Political cakes, yeah, why not?
And as if by magic, we have the cakes from Primrose Hill to our studio. I wouldn't be cruel enough to make you eat them yet. Perhaps later in the programme. But let's just pick through some of the issues that came up in the film. I mean, the key issue is obviously housing. And Karen, I think most parties would agree that housing is a huge issue in the capital. The question what to do about it, and even in Labour authority areas, the homes just aren't getting built, are they?
Well, clearly housing is not just an issue in terms of where people can find to live, but also what kind of city do we want to live in. So no, we haven't been building enough homes, although, you know, some good news from Sadiq Khan recently, but it's also about you know, what kind of homes are being built. So if you look around in many parts of the city, what you're seeing is a growth of the luxury housing sector. I mean, certainly in my own borough, walls and walls of luxury flats going up, and the people who are living next to them can't find anywhere to live that's affordable, whether they're, you know, middle class or whether they're people who are in need of social housing.
I mean,
so it's about those kinds of choices.
He's made it a focus of his to try and increase affordable housing, but he's missing his own targets on that quite drastically.
He's just hit an affordable housing target, but homes don't get built in 18 months. We all know that, but we know the process is about planning and it's about investment, and the government's only just given a decent tranche of money into this after halving the total amount of money that was going in to housing development. So these things don't happen overnight. But I mean, I think Sadiq is sending up very good messages and very important messages about affordable housing, not just housing in itself. We're getting not just the pressure on housing, but people actually saying that the developers need to be, you know, the relationship between councils like Westminster and developers need to be rethought, so they're not just going for the top end of the housing market.
Paul Scully, on that point, I mean, national government has a role to play here in terms of investment, in terms of more powers for local authorities to borrow to build. I mean, why isn't that coming forward?
Well, it's something that we've got to make sure that national, local, in this case London, the mayor and local authorities are working really tightly together, because it's no one body that's got the only answers. So national government has given local authorities a lot more power. They're investing more money. We've now seen the mayor actually within the last month actually double the number of starts, but he'd previously been lagging behind on that. Whereas we've got to make affordable is a term that actually is a political term. It isn't affordable to too many people. So in Sutton we've had a case where some council houses are being built, but they're being built at something like twice the cost of what you'd expect a builder to cost in open market.
Tom, coming in there, I mean, Sutton, this is your area. Isn't the brutal fact of this that this housing situation is a failure of successive parties, successive governments across the board? Are you hearing lots of anger about it?
Well, clearly housing, I think, has been a failure of successive governments. The sort of figure that we need to see being built in England is something like 300,000 a year, and we're nowhere near that. In London, I'm very pleased. I'm sorry that Paul is attacking Sutton Council. We've seen there, for the first time in 30 years, council homes being built, 90 council homes, and these are genuinely affordable. I think often the issue is that if people are homes in the affordable sector, so housing association homes, for instance, the rents are often higher, but actually council homes is what people need in places like Sutton, and for the first time 90 homes are being delivered. Those are homes that will go to local families who could not afford to rent in the private sector or indeed buy in London.
I just want to move on now to another issue that came up in the VT, and this is Windrush. Windrush is, of course, the treatment of migrants who have been in the UK, perhaps worked in the UK and lived in the UK for several decades, and some of them have found themselves in a situation where they've struggled to prove they have the right to stay and access services. Paul, is that coming up as an issue on the doorstep for you, given how ethnically diverse the capital is? No,
I've been around all 32 boroughs now over the last few months, and I've been to about 6 or 7 in the last week, and it hasn't come up. Yeah, I've had a little bit. No, I'm just saying what I've heard on the doorstep, and I've had a couple of emails about it. I've actually had someone in my surgery asking about it, so she's obviously concerned. But what we've got to remember in these elections, these are very much for electing local councillors. They're not going to be changing the immigration system. It's hard to get away from that
national picture. Karen, are you finding it come up?
Yes, I am, and I think it's again part of this same story about what kind of city is it that we live in, and what kind of city is it that we want to live in. And London is, you know, is a very diverse city, and it's a socially liberal city. And I think the danger of the Windrush story, you know, if you don't mind my saying so, for the Conservatives, is that it plays to an image that the Conservatives are not really in tune with modern London, and that's been an underlying trend for them for some time.
Well, you could say the same on the issue of anti-Semitism for Labour. I mean, it speaks to a party's values and image.
Which has hurt. Absolutely no question about it. I mean, I'm, you know, horrified by that, and particularly, you know, as a party that prides itself on being an anti-racist party. But for the, you know, in terms of the election on Thursday. I think this will reinforce a weakness that the Conservatives have.
Is an unfair one, because as you've seen in the last week, we've apologised for it. It is a mistake. It's something that actually should never have been allowed to happen. Well, it's happened. We've got to sort it out.
I think unfortunately, it's not just Windrush citizens. I've got a case in my constituency of a woman who came here when she was a child, 6, from India, who is now stateless. She's now nearing retirement because neither the British government nor the Indian government are willing to accept responsibility. So it's wider than just Windrush citizens. And I think the difficulty for the government is that this is about a picture of chaos and mismanagement, which of course is reflected in the way they're handling Brexit. Because whether you're a Remain supporter like me or many Leave supporters, they are looking at the government handling of this and thinking it is
we'll
catastrophic.
Come on to Brexit in just a moment, but just that point, Paul, we are hearing case after case which speaks to the government's wider approach on immigration, and in a city like London where that matters so much, it's going to hurt you, isn't
Alex,
it?
I would have known about this because if my father was still alive, he went through the same process. Actually, he had to get naturalisation. He came from Burma when it was before it was an independent state, and these kind of things. So I totally empathise with those people that are caught up in this, and this is why we've got to get it sorted out. And the Home Secretary, the government has been really resolute that we admitted that this is something that should not have been allowed to happen. It has happened. We've really got to make sure that that nobody is more adversely affected than they've already been.
Karen, a final thought
well,
from
I just
you.
think that it comes, as I say, on top of quite a long history of unfortunate treatment of a minority culture in ethnic minority culture in London, which including the go home vans, which all of this is kind of resonating, and it's resonating not just with the Windrush generation but more widely, and feeding through, and I'm certainly picking this up, into some of the EU citizens. I know we're going to come on to that, who are thinking, my goodness, if this is how people get treated, even when they've had assurances they're going to be all right, what does it say for us?
Nonetheless, these local elections are about electing councillors, and so we can be working on this immigration system, but that will not change as a result of Thursday's elections. It's all about local councillors.
These are about local councillors, in fact. So I'm going to stop you there for a second while we take our viewers through some of our key battlegrounds in London. Here's Jerry Thomas.
In Barnet, the Tories have a majority of 1, but allegations over anti-Semitism may hit Labour in a borough with a considerable Jewish presence. The City of Westminster has always been run by the Conservatives. To win, Labour would need to double the number of seats they hold on a 10% swing. In last year's general election, the Tories lost one of their MPs in Wandsworth, another borough historically run by the Tories, which Labour are targeting. And in south-west London, the boroughs of Sutton, Kingston and Richmond will be closely fought between the Lib Dems and the Conservatives.
OK, so let's just talk through some of these battlegrounds. Tom, I mean, the South West is a huge target for the Lib Dems. You're obviously campaigning quite hard on Brexit. Is that really cutting through?
Well, clearly there are parts of London like Kingston, Richmond, where there is a significant number of EU citizens. This will be the last chance, potentially, that they have to vote in any elections in the UK. And some of them may choose not just to support Liberal Democrats because we do run efficient local services, but also to express their view about the government handling of Brexit.
It didn't go brilliantly for you at the general election last year.
No, it didn't, but I mean, these are council elections, and of course I think what EU citizens will be looking at, and Karen touched on it earlier, is what's happened with the handling of Windrush citizens, a much smaller number of people, EU citizens across the country. We're talking 3 million who are now looking at the way the Home Office have handled the case of the Windrush citizens, are going to be very worried that when they start having to produce documentation to support their case for settled status, that many of those will end up in the same boat, frankly.
And Paul, you're in a similar neck of the woods, south-west London, although Sutton did vote for Leave in the referendum. But are you hearing that concern from EU citizens?
No, actually, I was in a street in Wandsworth not that long ago, and I met at least 2 or 3 EU citizens. They were all wanting to keep their weekly collection. It was one of the guys next door that was taking offence on their behalf.
So by weekly collection, you mean weekly bin collection? So
weekly bin collection. They were coming back to that and appreciating the low council tax in Wandsworth. But when you come back to Kingston and Sutton, you're looking at those that map there. You've got the Lib Dems in Kingston are campaigning against the very bin collection that we've got in Sutton, introduced by the Lib Dems. They're saying one thing in one area.
In Kingston, they have this. I was there yesterday, and as I understand it, they have exactly the same bin collection as in Sutton. So I'm not quite sure what Paul is saying, but clearly issues like bin collections are fundamental, but also issues like ensuring that we are building affordable housing, which we discussed earlier. and also just in terms of general competence, because Paul may want to refer to Sutton, but we can look at what's happened in Northamptonshire, admittedly a bit further out of London, where a Conservative county council has gone bankrupt as a result of, some would argue, the significant underfunding of local authorities around the country.
But on that point, Paul, there is a sense among some that people are sick of austerity, and that may play out in these local elections because it's had a direct effect.
And you're absolutely right, because it's actually about local choices and it's how you deal with the financial backdrop. So you can look at somewhere like Hillingdon, which has managed to, despite having the same financial settlement as other boroughs, has managed to freeze their council tax for 10 years. They've managed to sort out John McDonnell's his own local libraries in his patch, his constituency, by refurbishing them, or not only just keeping them open. And Kingston have managed to buy in 12 extra policemen. Hillingdon again and others have offered to buy the police station that Sadiq Khan wants to close. All of these things are about how you manage your local situation, and Conservative councils have proved to offer better services.
Karen, just to bring you in there, isn't it a point that some people would rather their council tax stays low than having to pay more for local services?
Of course, council tax is a factor, and it's, as Paul says, I mean, there is this mixture of the local and national that will determine all of these things. Although, interestingly enough, of course, the leader of Conservative Westminster has said that she's asking for a voluntary contribution for people in the highest value properties to go into specific services, but in recognition of the fact that you've got properties that are worth 20 and 30 million pounds that pay a lower council tax than the highest level in many other parts of the city. But what we've got, just going back to Paul's choices, is that each local council is making choices, and some of them, like in my own experience, Conservative councils, is a very bad choice. Westminster have closed down their entire youth service, for example. They pulled all their funding from their entire holiday schemes and after-school play services. So there are choices being made, and some of those choices are hitting some very, very poor communities indeed. And I think people are really sick of some of that.
Which I think Karen was touching on there, of course, is the whole issue of policing in London, where we have seen a very significant rise in serious crime, and unfortunately stabbings and so on. And that is taking place against the Home Office confirming that actually the number of police officers on our streets does have an impact on crime. We've seen significant cutbacks. We're now seeing the proposal of mergers.
Although we saw documents
her own reports say that it does. And we're now seeing this idea of merging the borough command units so that Sutton Police would end up linked up with Croydon and Bromley. And I know from a public meeting that I hosted just a couple of weeks ago that people are adamant that they do not want to see that happen, because they will see resources.
But you know, Sutton's already merged with Croydon and Bromley. It's already happened, and this is also something. It's also something that's actually the responsibility of the mayor and national government to the police.
£1 billion
so actually,
just to brief, are you worried about this?
Well, what I don't want people to be thinking on Thursday when they're electing a councillor, that councillor is going to be responsible for the policing. They'll have influence on the policing, but they won't be. But they're not electing a government. They're not electing a mayor.
In Sutton, of course, they are, because we have the Safer Sutton partnership where the police and the council work together jointly, so it is an issue in Sutton.
We're going to have to stop you there. Thank you. Well, we haven't heard yet from the Greens, who say they are mounting their biggest local election campaign in the capital. Tanjil Rashid joined them as they campaigned this week in Lambeth, in South London.
The Greens like to think of themselves as being on the side of nature, though nature wasn't doing them any favours this week. No amount of rain could stop these Greens from turning out in force. The Greens are fielding more candidates than they ever have in a local election, including in half of the wards up for grabs in the capital. They're targeting especially areas like Lambeth, which has one of the youngest populations in the country, as well as being the most pro-Remain.
It's Amelia Womack, Deputy Leader of the Green Party.
They say their aim is to become the official opposition here. But it's an uphill battle. They may have more than 800 candidates across London, but of those only 4 are sitting councillors and only 1 in Lambeth. They all sit in Labour-dominated councils. It's these that the party is targeting. Some on the left have argued there isn't much between Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party and the Greens, but their deputy leader is convinced her party has differentiated itself.
We've seen Greens who have been challenging the status quo on councils, making sure that we're listening to residents and providing transparency and scrutiny in complacent councils that have developed across London, and making sure that we've got people who simply will table motions on issues such as air pollution, housing, and making sure that we're working for our communities is the power that Greens have. It's very clear in London that the difference that a Green makes, and standing up for people as well as standing up for the environment. So making sure that that we're tackling the issues around council housing or air pollution, as well as even looking at issues around plastics and the consumption of plastic. But if all of these issues, the environment is a key part of everything that we do. It's the air that we breathe, it's the space that we use. But on top of that, we've always stood for social justice as well.
Some would say there's a contradiction between the needs of London in terms of housing and the needs of the environment in terms of the green belt.
London has so many issues around housing. It's not just about building, and it's especially not about building on the green belt. It's about how we make sure we have affordable homes, but on top of that, that we're not just having people who are speculatively investing in the city from around the world. That is creating we have around 20,000 empty homes across London, and some of these issues fundamentally need to be addressed so that we have a London that works for Londoners and work for our residents and not for the profits of big companies and organisations.
Right, hold up the boards.
Since last year's general election, analysts have identified a swing to the left across London. After May the 3rd, it will be interesting to see whether that translates to success for the Greens as well.
Tanjil Rashid reporting there. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left and we've only got a few days now before people go to the polls. So I'm going to ask you all, if you can, to make your final pitch to voters. Why should people go to the ballot box to support you in these elections? Tom first.
Well, first of all, I think that there are large parts of London where people need some opposition, where Labour control the council with no opposition at all, and that's a role for the Liberal Democrats. I think in terms of the council that we control, Sutton, for instance, we now have the highest recycling rate in London. We have a population that are very happy living in a borough that has very good schools, very good parks, very good library facilities. So we've managed to maintain those facilities against a backdrop which is increasingly challenging financially. And I think people can be confident that Liberal Democrats will do well in places like Sutton, Kingston, Richmond, because we have seen in other parts of the country very good by-election results, particularly against the Conservatives. But there may be other areas like Haringey, for instance, where Labour councillors have been deselected,
Karen,
where we may also be challenging.
Are going to be your opposition?
Well, I don't think they'll be our local opposition, but I think what we really need is a city that works in the interests of everybody. And I think we've really seen some punishment hit on local governments in the last few years. We've seen policing down by a third in my own borough. Services are really getting stretched, and there are choices to be made, and Labour councils will make good choices that will provide for the people who need them most, not just for the extremely rich. And some of the issues around development and housing development absolutely have to be core to the agenda. We're seeing housing getting built, but it's luxury homes, and Londoners are getting locked out of it. And we really do need Labour councils and councillors who are going to stand up for the interests of those people who are locked out.
Paul, if you believe the polls, you're going to take quite a drubbing in these elections in London. Do you believe them, and why should people try and help you avoid that?
It's undoubtedly going to be a tough set of elections for us. It was hard in 2014, in this part of the cycle. We're also mid-term of running government as well, so it's going to be tough with us. But nonetheless, it is all about local councillors. It's all about local services. Conservatives have proven time and time again to run better services at a lower council tax. You have got councils like Haringey, Newham, Tower Hamlets, where Labour seem to have a sense of entitlement rather than a sense of duty. When you've got Tower Hamlets pleading poverty, yet the mayor's sitting on 156 million quid worth of reserves that he could invest back in his local area. And Liberals in Kingston and Richmond just need to look at Sutton.
Thank you all to my guests for joining us today. We will tuck into the cupcakes, but for that's it from us.